We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome two guests onto our show, Terri Bogue and Robert Bogue, Chief Operating Officer at Thor Projects LLC and President of Thor Projects LLC. Terri and Robert, thank you so much for being here. If you both want to give us a little bit of an intro, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you both remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I'm Terri Bogue, she, her. I am a clinical nurse specialist, which probably doesn't mean a lot to most people. It's an advanced practice nurse that there's few of us, but it's an awesome way to how you change systems. Growing up, I wanted to grow up, and first I was going to be a secretary and thought that would be super cool. And then I wanted to do computers, and finally it was like, hey, you know what? I want to change the world. Let's be a nurse. So there you go.
And I'm Rob Bogue, he, him, and I wanted to be an astronaut, and I'm still holding out hope. I'm a little older than I probably should be, but I'm still holding out hope that I will be able to go into space.
I love it. It's never too late. I always think it's interesting to journey back and say, what did we think we would be when we were younger as well? And in terms of thinking about changing the world and our impacts that we have, I would love to kick off the conversation by asking, what have you been most excited to see in terms of companies and employers really leaning into authentic mental health benefits and conversations?
I think that I'm most excited that we're willing to talk about mental health. It's not, we still have a stigma, but, with us for burnout, sometimes it's much easier to say, oh, I'm burnout than I'm depressed. But we're able to have the conversations and not feel like people are going to go, oh my gosh, can you believe they have a mental health problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, if you had a mental health problem, you were just not good enough, right? Like if you broke your arm and you go to the hospital, you go to a doctor, they said it and it's in a cast. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, you must be amazing. You did this amazing thing and you broke your arm, and if you had depression, it was like, ooh, I shouldn't get near you because that might be contagious. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. It's not really all that different.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think you're right in terms of the stigma and the challenges and us being more open to discussing that, especially in a work setting too. And I know you wrote a book specifically around Extinguish Burnout, a practice guide to prevention and recovery. Before we get into, the ways of preventing burnout, how you recognize it, how do you really define burnout?
So classically, burnout has been described by three characteristics. And the problem with that is the characteristics are actually not all that great. So the first characteristic is exhaustion. Now, the problem with exhaustion is we've all been having the time of our lives and exhausted at the same time, right? Like you're skiing all day, you come back and you lay down on the bed, forget to take your clothes off, and you wake up, it's like 4 a.m. You're like, I didn't even eat dinner, right? And so exhaustion is actually a pretty bad indicator, but it is one of the three classic ways. The second one is cynicism. Now, cynicism is interesting because everybody has this picture in their head, and it's two old guys sitting on rocking chairs on a front porch playing checkers, right? And they're like, when I was a kid and we didn't do this right, and it's old, whatever it is, Dennis Wilson. So there's cynicism, but cynicism actually is odd because cynicism is an effect, not a cause for burnout. Now, if we get to the last one, and this is inefficacy, our ability to think we're getting things done. When we lose that, when we think about we have no more hope about changing things, blah, 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 well, it's funny, that's burnout, and it actually causes the cynicism. We don't get cynical about things until we stop believing we can make them change. And so though there are three characteristics that people talk about classically with burnout, it really, really comes down to that bottom one, that last one, which is that feeling of efficacy, that feeling that you can get something done.
Yeah, I think that is helpful context to understand, especially as we are talking more about burnout and what that means in stress and really identifying what it comes down to as well. And then when we define it, we can talk about ways to really prevent it from happening, both on an individual level too, right? Because there is that individual onus, and then kind of the non-negotiables that a company can do as well to create that framework so you don't feel like you need to do X to succeed. Can you tell us about just like a couple steps to really proactively think about preventing burnout from that individual lens, and then thinking about systemic ways from that company lens as well as a second pillar?
I'll take the personal. And when we start teaching burnout, we have a bathtub model. So if you think about a bathtub and you have these spigots coming in, filling your bathtub, right? That's easy. They all have knobs. You can turn them up, you can turn them down. And that is results, it's support, and it's self-care. So when you think about those things, we have to look at the things we do, our results of not just what we think they are, but we need to check and make sure that what we're thinking we're doing, we're doing. You could go home tonight and go, oh my gosh, that was the worst show I ever did. But someone listening to it could say, that was amazing. I can't believe you did that so well. And then you get to support, and we don't think about the fact that we need help. And a lot of times we think that if I need help or I accept help, I'm not good enough. That's not true. We all need help. And then self-care. How do you take care of your body physically, emotionally, and spiritually so that self-care actually builds your bathtub? It gives you more personal agency or more ability to get things done. Well, if there was nothing draining your bathtub would always be full, right? You would never have to worry about burnout. What drains your bathtub is demands. And we have to remember that drain also has a nozzle. You can turn it up, you can turn it down. You can say, I can't do that right now, and really limit your demands so that you're able to maintain your personal agency.
Yeah, I think as organizations, we can use that model and transform it and look at the way that we work with other people. Are we properly recognizing their results? Are we giving them the kinds of recognition they want? And I'm not talking about the Star Club and everything else, but just talk to people and say, hey, you know what? You did a really good job, and be specific. Hey, you really did a good job on that report last week to Bob. The second for support is, are you really engaging them with the right tools? Have you said, okay, I want you to create this masterpiece, beautiful photograph, and I want you to do all those things, and no, you can't have Photoshop. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. People know that they're not being supported. And then the self-care aspect, and I think this is one of the places where we've seen a lot of movement lately, right? Like there's meditation and break rooms, all this stuff that enables people to be more aware of themselves and what they need. So I think that's really good, and I think we can continue to move that down the line. But I don't necessarily believe that that's the core. It's not like, oh, give them the meditation room or whatever. The core is really about how do you enable them to feel like they still have that personal agency. They have the ability to get things done.
Mm-hmm. We talk about that customization at scale too, in terms of, taking care of mental health at different parts of your career, different parts of your life can look different. So to your point, Rob, how you really enable someone to do their best work, set them up for success, and not make decisions for other folks as well. Terri, I know you talked about kind of the stigma that can be around, like asking for help means I can't do it myself, and I don't want to kind of ask someone to take time out of their day. But we know that's a myth, because everybody needs a little help, and it's okay to ask questions and really work together to achieve a goal. Are there any other myths or stigmas that you still hear around burnout that you'd like to break?
There is a myth out there that if you're in burnout, you should have a gold medal. That you should be working yourself so hard that you're in burnout, and that must mean that you're really important. All of us need to be able to do the things we can do to protect our mental health.
Yeah, I think the biggest myth that I would offer up is one that is propagated by the World Health Organization. And so like the World Health Organization says it's an occupational phenomenon, right? Burnout is not an occupational phenomenon. Like when I got burned out, it was not about work. When Terri got burned out, it was not about work. It's not about work. It's about life, right? And feeling ineffective. And yeah, they've got the classification for ICD-9 and it's occupational, whatever.
And work can cause burnout.
Work can cause burnout. And you have organizations that are that are inclined to creating problems or inclined to preventing problems. But at the same time, you have to recognize this is life, right? And if you don't feel effective in your relationships, or if you don't feel effective in the way that you interact with your family, those things can lead you to burnout. And by the way, it'll spill over. You'll feel more burned out at work because you're burned out at home, and vice versa.
Absolutely. Recognizing that burnout, we can be burned out by work, but it can be one of the many things going on in our lives because we're wearing a lot of different hats. We have different roles, and really can't separate those two things out as well. We can't check it at the virtual or in-person door when we go into the office or when we're working. I would love to know kind of what is the research you found that really indicates that, it's not only a nice to have, but a need to have, because when you have folks who feel like they're supported, feel like they're healthy, you have better results, and it's a net win for everyone.
Yeah, I think there's research that kind of surrounds it, right? You can look at Amy Edmondson's research around the fearless organization and how you need to create a feeling of safety. And that's an aspect of it. And that the teams that are more able to communicate are more performant, right? And that actually even goes all the way back to Richard Hackman's work. Richard Hackman was at Harvard and did a lot of work in this space as well. And what we find is that people are impeded by their own beliefs about not being able to be effective. So when we feel like we're ineffective, we actually we manifest that, we create that, right? We are less effective because we're spending so much time on our emotions and saying, I'm not being effective enough and I'm a really bad person, rather than going, you know what, I'm getting done what I'm getting done and I'm just going to go. And so I think the research is pretty clear that the more mentally healthy you are, including the avoidance of burnout, the more connected you are to your peers, the better your performance will be. And in today's world, we need performance and agility. We need the ability for people to kind of flex in ways and spaces that they've not done before. And that's hard to do when you're feeling burned out.
Absolutely. Psychological safety is something that we strongly believe in here at AllVoices as well. And it just doesn't happen overnight or because you say that you have the intent to do it. You have to take intentional steps, actions, really lean into hard conversations, and really be vulnerable and empathetic, especially as leaders, as executives, as managers in the work setting. And one of the major stressors that can contribute to burnout is having hard conversations that may or may not lead to conflict. You don't know. But there are power dynamics with your manager. What advice do you have to engage in conflict in a really healthy way between a manager and an individual contributor?
Well, I think when you look at conflict and you realize that all conflict comes from two things, okay? And you're like, wait, Terry, no. It's a difference of perspective or a difference in values. And once you start to learn each other's perspective and what is valuable to you, and the places that you have the greatest value. So for me, family has a very high value. We have 7 kids and family is really important. I'm really low on the social status. Okay. So like, I don't care what kind of car I drive. So if I have a really strong feeling about family and someone else has a really strong feeling about something else, and it comes into conflict, those values can turn into a horrible, just a mess. When you start to realize that what I value and what someone else values can be different and it's okay, and it's about our perspective, you can easily or more easily mitigate a conflict.
I think one of the skills that we teach when we're teaching conflict is we teach that understanding is not agreement. You have to understand the other person to be in a conversation, to be in a conflict, to be in a dialogue, to really to interact with other humans. You have to understand them. That does not, however, mean you agree with them, whether those choices are for you personally or whether it's their choices, right? Like as parents, we find that there are decisions our children make that we're like, don't agree with that at all. But we can understand it. We can understand where they're coming from. And that, I think, is the way that you have these conversations is, if you're a subordinate, you're trying to talk to your manager, boss, let me understand, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Why is it you want to go in this direction? What are the factors that are leading you there? Rather than going, well, I just don't agree. Oh, that's going to get you stuck.
Absolutely. And you want to continue the conversation, ask curiosity-based questions, and really provide the context behind the why of why you're having this conversation. And I was talking to someone earlier, and I think this is related to that concept of seeking to understand before being understood as well, and really coming into it with that mindset. And understanding is not, full agreement. I really love that kind of segment as well. In terms of knowing if your organization or your team is really quote unquote healthy, or they're taking those steps, are there any key performance indicators that we can look to say, okay, this company culture is healthy and this company is doing a great job of preventing burnout?
I think so. So when we look at indicators, there's leading and lagging, right? And so leading indicators are things you can change. Lagging indicators is what happened. I think you can look at turnover numbers, and you can say, if people aren't turning over, then I probably don't have a burnout problem. If people are really turning over very fast, then I probably do have a burnout. Now there's this middle ground, and you have to get very precise in the way that you define it for your organization. I'd say that one of the challenges we see as people define those KPIs is they often discount the base rate. So what I mean by that is long-term care. The CNAs, the people who are helping the residents, they turn over really, really fast, like 150% per year.
Yeah. In a normal year.
And that's normal, right? And everybody's sort of accepted that. Mm-hmm. That's accepted. So the problem with KPIs is not necessarily that you can't get to using something like turnover as a metric. It's really about what you think about that metric. Is 150% okay? Is 100% okay? Well, it could be for your business model, for what you need, for it can be that that's the right answer. In CNAs, it may be. But you have to look at that and say, if I really want to take care of my employees, what would I do differently? Mm-hmm. What are the things that I would change so that I get away from whatever the industry standard is, and I cut it in half, or I cut it to a 10th. And it really radically changes the way that you think about something. So I think the KPIs are, knowing the KPI is fine, but you got to be careful not to discount the values you're getting and accept them just because, oh, well, everybody else is getting them too.
Absolutely. You have to look internally on where you are as an organization. What does, where are we today? What is the aspirational state? What is the industry standard? And really kind of push ourselves to continuously be better too. What unique role do you see specifically healthcare providers in having to set that precedent for truly taking care of their team's physical, mental, and overall well-being, especially in the industry, that they're in, where we know, especially over these last few years, there's been a lot of burnout and stressors and things of that nature?
Healthcare is this really strange space where you have this belief that you have to take care of everyone else. And that when you take care of yourself, you're being self-indulgent.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be there to take care of their patients. And if that means you're working, 8, 12-hour shifts in a week, and that overlaps and it's horrible. But you forget that you have to take care of yourself. And in healthcare, we do a really horrible job of supporting one another, of encouraging each other to ask for help, encouraging each other to say, it's okay to say, no, you can't do something, because that seems like something that you should never say. So in healthcare, it's really, I think, about understanding that you're a human too. When we fly, and I'm sure you've flown, and the waitress, the stewardess says, put on your own mask first. There's so much truth to that. If you don't put on your own mask and you're putting masks on everybody else, you're not going to be able to. Healthcare, we need to learn that. It's a hard lesson.
Yeah, it definitely is.
And I think that relates to your earlier point as well, in terms of when, the myth around when you are burned out, you're working so hard, you're doing a great job. This is the state that you should be at, a marker of success. When in reality, it is a good thing to not be burned out, to take time for yourself, have that work-life blend too. Is there anything else you both would like to share that I didn't ask, or maybe 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope listeners really bring with them after hearing our conversation around burnout and, really proactively taking those steps for self-care?
You know the one I want to do. So I'm going to ask you a question. How do you talk to yourself?
Oh, I am gonna.
To yourself.
It depends on the day, but I think I am very harsh and critical of myself, if I'm being super honest.
Great. I thank you for being super honest. And most of us, the voices in our head tell us all the bad things and not even the truth, but we think it's truth. So if we can just learn to talk to ourselves like we would talk to our friends, if we could learn to not say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're so stupid. Why did you do that? That changes everything about us when we start being a little more gentle and supportive to ourselves.
Yeah, I think I think that if this conversation was interesting to you, if it was something that you're like, hey, I don't know, maybe, possibly, I would encourage you, Terri and I have the Extinguish Burnout site that goes along with the book. And there are tons of articles up there about things like how do you talk to yourself and self-care and all of the topics. And at least for a while, we've had the entire course free because COVID and whatever. We've committed to at least the end of this year. Probably we'll do that again because we started that in 2020. And I would say get help, right? Like, don't suffer through this.
Mm-hmm.
Don't like sit there and go, oh, I'm just gonna power through it and I can be burned out and still be productive. No, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, but you can't.
Yeah.
The research does not support that. So yeah, I say, and don't be ashamed of it, but just go get help. It's not that you're bad, it's that you're not aligned, your thinking, your expectations about yourself and what you're actually able to get done. Get those two things in alignment. You have a great day.
Absolutely. I love it. I think those are really two great calls to action in terms of speak to yourself the way you would speak to friends, family, and, really think critically about that feedback that you're giving to yourself. And then in terms of really seeking out the resources that are readily available that the two of you have provided. And really, there's a ton of research that supports when you take care of your mental, physical, health, and you really make it a priority, it is better for everyone. Terri and Robert, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Of course. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, here at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.